Welcome to Heartland Vineyard's Message of the Week. We hope you enjoy this message. To learn more about the Vineyard, visit us at hvchurch.org.
These next few weeks, last week we started a series, and it's called Critical Journey, and we've asked 8 different people in our church to share their story. Not necessarily their testimony of how they came to Christ, although that's part of their story, but a bit of their story. And it's been just nothing but fun, and I want you to know that every one of these is posted on our website. So if you'd like to see the ones that you're not able to see, Susan Stanley shared in our first service, and now Kay is going to be sharing her story in this service. And I want to make you aware, Kay is way ahead of me. She's written a book. I've not written a book yet, but someday maybe I'm going to get to. This is really her story, and it's available to you if you'd like to purchase one out in the information center. We'd love for you to get a copy of that one. So this morning, will you welcome with me Kay Cervetti?
Thank you. Okay, so I've been a fitness instructor for almost 30 years, so I'm picturing all of you in fitness clothes. Makes it easier for me. Okay, so I like to start with my family because they're the greatest blessing to me. I get to be mom to 3 of the greatest kids. Back in the left-hand corner, that's my twin sister. And so I'm super blessed to have a twin sister. And then my oldest daughter is back on the right, and that's her husband on the right. And then 3 of her girls are in this picture, but they have 5 girls. And then my oldest son is in the middle on the hearth, and then my youngest son is crouched down, holding the dog. So they live all over the United States, so I get to go to really fun places to visit them. I began a nonprofit in 1998 called the Training Center, and it's to help people get healthy through fitness, friendship, and faith. And so in 2013, I said to my boys, don't get me anything for Mother's Day that I would have to maintain or dust. And so I'm thinking, let's do a weekend away. Let's do something kind of fun, and maybe we'll go shopping, and we'll go out to eat, and we'll watch a movie, and we'll do fun stuff like that. And they signed me up for a half marathon. Right. And so here's the picture as we finished our first half marathon together. And then we kind of started this really cool tradition. So we started kind of running together as a family. And then the next picture is at mile 8 is kind of our deal. So every mile 8 we take a photo. And so this was our first one on the left, and literally they did not train for that first one. I trained the whole summer. It was the hottest summer on record. And then the one on the right, we ran together, and so it just kind of became a thing for us. In September of last year, I ran my 20th half marathon, and I've run 3 marathons. I did this fun thing called Hustle Up the Hancock, where you actually hustle up the steps of the Hancock building in Chicago, and I try to go to Chicago because that's where my oldest son lives. And so I did that, and it's 91 floors. And it's 1,632 steps. But you do get a medal for finishing. So whatever we do, it's always a lot of fun. So would you pray with me as we get started? Father, I just thank you that you would speak to our hearts today. Lord, I pray that you would show us the message that's in the message. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would be glorified in this time that we spend together. I ask all of this in your holy and precious name. So this morning I want to turn to Mark 5 and look at the demoniac of Gadara. I love this story. Mark 5, 1 through 20. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." and he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs were feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all of the people were amazed. Now, as the chapter opens, we find that Jesus and his disciples pulling the boat ashore at Gadara, where there was a graveyard. Now, when we say graveyard, try not to think of a modern-day cemetery. Instead, it was a hillside with pockets of caves, which were used as tombs. Today, this area is known as part of the Golan Heights. But in Jesus' time, it was a burial place. Today, it's going to be the setting for a story. As we place this story in the context of Mark's gospel, we find it happens immediately after the calming of the storm. We can imagine the disciples are still a little dazed and confused from what I'm sure they would consider to be a near-death experience on the Sea of Galilee. Can't you just picture them falling down and kissing the ground as soon as their feet touch dry land? Remember now that they made that journey during the night. So they landed on the other side. It was dark or maybe dawn, and they found themselves in this place among the tombs. It sounds like the setting for a scary movie. Picture the silence of the night, the waves gently lapping up on the shore. The disciples were still wide-eyed from their experience on the water when out of the darkness comes this naked man screaming and howling in the night. Verses 3, 4, and 5, there was a man with at least 2,000 demonic spirits who dwelled among the tombs. He was comfortable living among dead things. There was no life where he was living. He was surrounded by death. And now by the time we get to verse 15, it says, when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. I just think that's a very odd statement. I find it very interesting. I read things like this, and it makes me wonder, why would they be afraid? Change is really hard for people. Jesus had single-handedly changed their social and economic atmosphere. If you've ever studied families of alcoholics, there's a family dynamic that's at work. There's a type of functional dysfunction that happens. Everyone knows what to expect, and they like it that way. If you listen carefully to the story, you catch the fact that not everyone is thrilled about this man's healing. Jesus had messed with their economy, and now somebody is out a herd of pigs. Somebody is going to have to be responsible for a crisis response plan to deal with this situation. Somebody was going to have to pay for the losses. The Gadarenes weren't sure how much more healing they could take. Now that the demoniac was healed, who's going to be the new scapegoat? With this crazed man now healed, the focus of people's attention would have to shift, maybe even to their own problems. When Jesus comes to town, lives are changed, people are changed, and businesses change forever. This man was the reason that Jesus looked across the Sea of Galilee and said to his disciples, "Let us pass over onto the other side." Think about all of the experiences of the madman of Gadara. This man had a testimony. I bet he could keep you on the edge of your seat for hours with his stories. He eventually took his testimony to the Decapolis, and he became a forerunner for Paul, who would bring the gospel to that region many years later. So think about this. There are people who needed to hear his story because the enemy is overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Revelation 12:11. So, what about your story? And what about my story? I was given up for adoption at birth, along with my twin sister. Aren't we cute? We were adopted by parents who weren't equipped to be parents and subjected to a home life of silence and violence. I was never given permission to have emotions. In fact, I was punished for having them. Nothing was modeled for me. I didn't know how to react or how to feel. I was taught to be a keeper of secrets. In a nutshell, my home life had left me with deep wounds and absolutely no skills for the future. I was sexually molested by an uncle and raped as a teenager, but I clung to the dreams deep within my heart. My mother refused to believe the accusations about my uncle, even though they had happened to other family members. The circle of people that I could depend on to keep me safe became very small, but my dreams lived on. At the age of 8, I started a 10-year competitive swimming career. I was pretty good. I had several medals, ribbons, and records to show for it. It was an escape from my home life, and so I jumped in with both feet. In hindsight, swimming probably saved my life. The constant fighting and swearing and hitting at home had taken its toll, and by the age of 16, I had survived years of suicide temptations. I found myself pregnant by the first man who told me that he loved me. So having been adopted, I decided to give the baby up for adoption, but my parents would not hear it and made the arrangements for me to have an abortion. At the age of 18, after graduating from high school, I began working at John Deere. I married the only man who told me that he loved me in an attempt to right all of the wrongs. Just a few months into the marriage, I found out I didn't have all the tools to fix that which was broken. So in shame, I divorced him a year later and told myself I'd never make that mistake again. Relying on the advice of my parents, I dated and married a man who was perfect in their eyes and the furthest thing from my Prince Charming. Just 2 short years later, I found myself divorced again, and now a single mother to a toddler. My dream was now buried deep in my heart, and the days for dreaming were few and far between. So in my early 20s, I was still working a good job and showing promising parenting skills, and life began to look up. I attended night classes to get a 2-year degree in computer programming. I had a teacher tell me about heaven and hell and this guy named Jesus. He led me in a prayer, and I gave my life to Christ that day. He told me just that easily I could know that I was going to go to heaven when I died. Life got smoother, but there was still so much to learn. Marriage number 3 was short-lived also. I fought hard not to get divorced, and when he told me he would never change, well, I made the decision to walk away. Revelation finally came when I realized that I was the common denominator in all of those marriages. I met a godly man who saw something in me that I couldn't even see in myself, and he asked me to move to Des Moines and marry him. I left John Deere after 11 years, and my daughter and I moved to Des Moines with him. In hindsight, he was everything you would ever want in a godly husband, but I wasn't in a place emotionally where I could see that. I didn't know what I didn't know. My mother told me if I married him, she would never speak to me again. So trusting anyone more than I trusted myself, the wedding dress went back, and the engagement and the relationship ended. Walking away was the hardest thing I had ever done. A few weeks later, and now laid off from my job, I realized I was pregnant with our child, and now alone. I didn't know what to do, so I repeated history with another abortion. I can't even adequately describe the desperation, but life had gone from bad to worse. I eventually met a man that my mother approved of, and I really thought this was the guy. He had 3 girls, and I had my daughter, and we had 2 boys together. They all lived with us, and we were one busy household. I was living the dream, because being a stay-at-home mom was my favorite job ever. But on the inside, I was still broken and searching for answers. But God was healing me, but there was so much more work to be done. I still didn't know it. I met a man online and began having an affair with him. When you have no boundaries and you meet someone else who has no boundaries, you'll find yourself in a place you thought you could never go. There's a saying that goes something like, sin will take you further than you ever wanted to go, keep you longer than you ever wanted to stay, and cost you more than you ever wanted to pay. A separation followed, and then my mom decided that she would go to court and say that my husband would be the better parent. That became a defining moment for me. No matter what, no one was taking my kids from me. I worked really hard to see our marriage restored. I remember Pastor Jimmy Evans saying in a teaching that we marry according to our emotional health. That didn't mean much to me then, but it would make more sense to me in the years to come. I had heard about a place where they did intense prayer ministry, and I figured that couldn't hurt. It's okay to laugh, because sometimes if we don't laugh, we'll want to cry. I was pretty desperate. That's probably an understatement. I went to the Elijah House in Idaho, and it was the first big step in freedom. Another big chunk of healing came when I went to an advanced deliverance conference in Chicago. I wasn't being super spiritual. I went because I was curious and skeptical. I wanted to know more about this God of the Bible. So I fasted for 12 days before I went, hoping for a breakthrough in my marriage. That weekend, rejection left and freedom kept coming. I prayed powerful prayers over my kids. They knew a life and a freedom that I had never known. My boys and I were water baptized in 2003. That was a great day. We began to take God at his word every single day. I remember saying to God after I was baptized, okay, if we're going to do this, you and I, you're going to have to teach me everything. I need to know truth, and I'm trusting you to show me truth. Trust is a huge thing for me, so I am believing every promise in your word. And if your word says it, I'm going to stand on it. I'm all in, 100%. Marriage number 4 lasted for 18 years. And in those 18 years, I got to know Jesus, and a beautiful relationship developed. I grew, I learned, I gave thanks. I became a different woman. When my oldest son nearly died from an unknown tree nut allergy, I began the search for my biological family. And my life hasn't been the same since. It took 3 weeks to find my biological mom, and that story should be made into a movie. It's one of my favorite stories to share. Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. I had waited my whole life to meet my mom. And the night I met my biological mom, she said to me, I've waited my whole life for you to come back to me. That's a picture of her the night that we met her. A lot of healing. She told me I could ask her anything, and I asked her why. Why did you give us up for adoption? She told me that she had had 3 children before us and was divorced, and she couldn't afford to have one more, not knowing that she was going to have twins. And then she said this, then 4 years after having you, I still wasn't married and got pregnant again and had another set of twin girls and gave them up for adoption. Then 4 years later, she was married and got pregnant and found out she was going to have twins. And she said, dear God, don't give me girls, because every time I look at them, I'll think of the girls I gave up. She had my twin brothers. There are 9 of us. God is in the business of restoration. She gave me the name of my dad, and I found him. They had been high school sweethearts. If I ever lose my hair and get glasses, this is what I'll look like. Kind of scary. More healing, 4 more brothers. There are 13 of us, and I found every single one of them. When we would have get-togethers, we would hear stories. We had one of these get-togethers, and I walked away with a photograph. And this is a photograph of my mom, and I said, there's a story in here. What is the story? And she said, this was the summer after I had you. We were born in January. This was in June. She said, I was so depressed and so despondent. She said, I didn't know what to do. So she spent some time in MHI. And then she told me this. When her father, my grandfather, found out that she was pregnant with us, he got a prescription for her to cause her to abort us. When she started to spot, she quit taking them, and she lied to her father for the first time in her life and told him that they didn't work. And in it all, God was restoring the years. I finally graduated from college after 26 years with a degree in health education, and I now substitute teach in the schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. I became ordained in 2012 through a ministry that rescues orphans from human trafficking and builds orphanages and cities in third world countries. I've been blessed to do weddings and funerals, go into the jails and the hospitals. I did things that stretched my faith, like teaching church and celebrate recovery at the jail and leading people to Christ. One of the sheriffs called me as they were releasing a gal and asked if I would take her where she needed to go. On the way to her destination, I showed her where we lived in case she ever needed a place to go. Not long after that, she moved in with us and accepted Christ. I remember one night I was taking her to work and it was raining and we had just picked up fast food for her, and I was sitting at the light and my gas gauge was on 2 miles till empty. I was telling God how I had to get her to work and I had other errands to run and how I just hate pumping gas in the rain. And just like that, my gas gauge went up slowly all the way to 34 miles till empty. We watched in awe and then looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" Our faith grew. I still chuckle about that today as she is married with children. God amazes me. I taught school for 2 years and had a student who was feeling lost. She came and stayed at our house. We loved her like she was one of us. She accepted Christ and graduated from high school. She went on to finish college and is married with children. And God amazed me again. I followed in the footsteps of the Apostle Paul to Greece, Turkey, Ephesus, and the island of Patmos twice, and the Bible came alive. My biological dad died in 1998, just 22 months after I had met him. My adoptive dad died in 2013, and then my adoptive mom died 13 months later. While I had suspected that my adoptive mom didn't like me most of my life, when she died, she confirmed it for me by writing me out of my parents' will. She left my inheritance to my sister, my children, and my former stepchildren. It's just as hard being a child thinking that you're unwanted as it is to be an adult and have it confirmed. But God was true to his word, and he was near to me when I was brokenhearted. There were very tough days ahead. There were many days when I doubted everything about me, but I trusted God, and God became everything to me. It was during that time when my kids were in college and my nest was officially empty that I began running. One of my greatest running accomplishments was the I-35 challenge. That means that I ran a marathon in Kansas City on Saturday, drove up Interstate 35, and ran a marathon on Sunday in Des Moines. I remember crossing the finish line, and I said to myself, "What are you running from?" I had just run over 52 miles in 2 days. You get an extra medal for doing that. This is what my medal rack at home looked like. Okay, here's the other one. So hear me on this. Every addiction is a form of self-protection until it nearly kills us. Sometimes we have to come to the end of ourselves to find God. When I asked God, why have these things happened for the first time in my life, I heard the audible voice of God say, it was familiar. That sent me on a journey to reevaluate and finally understand so much of my past and how the brokenness of my past was affecting my future. God has been so faithful to answer my questions. That began my journey to emotional health. I had gone out to Barnes & Noble looking for a particular book on emotional health, and as I stood in the self-help section, a book fell off the shelf. No kidding. It fell at my feet, and I picked it up, and the title was Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. I thought to myself, what kind of an idiot would buy that book? I want to tell you that I'm the proud owner of that book, and it's changed my life. I found myself on page after page. In May of 2016, I noticed that the lymph nodes in my groin were swollen, and I was sharing with a couple of my early morning participants how my legs were swelling so much that I could barely bend my knees. I said, it's so weird, and so all of a sudden. And one of my fitness participants said to me, you know what I do, right? And I said, no, I don't think I know what you do. She said, I'm an oncology nurse, and I'm telling you to get that checked out right away. That scared me to death. And I got into the doctor the next day, and she said, yeah, that's not good. We're going to start by ruling out the 2 biggies, but she was still shaking her head. While we were waiting on the blood work, I got on my face before God for the next 3 days, and I read scripture, listened to worship, music, and I prayed Psalm 103, 1 through 5, again and again. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits. Who pardons all of our iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with loving kindness and compassion, who satisfies your years with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagle. Over a 3-day period of time when I was on my face before God, he healed my body. My biological mom died 2 years ago. I knew her almost 20 years. She was my hero, and she loved Jesus. She was nothing short of amazing. The Center for Disease Control says my adverse childhood experiences should make me an adult with adverse health outcomes. I should be an obese, chain-smoking alcoholic who is battling IV and illicit drug use with sexually transmitted disease and who has attempted suicide. I guess you could say I'm a loss expert. And yet, God has redeemed my life. I have none of those issues. Through it all, God taught me about the love of a father and the goodness of God. When I asked God how he could use this mess that I've made, he's been showing me. I have a heart to help the hurt, the helpless, and the hopeless because, well, that's who I used to be. God has been so very good to me. What he's done for me, he'll do for you. It doesn't matter what vision God has given you, whatever the call is on your life. I can say it may take longer than you think and maybe harder than you ever imagined. This is not the story I ever would have written for myself. But can I say it is so worth it? Arriving at your destination is thrilling, but the joy is in the journey. As we go through life, we need to ask ourselves one question. Did you do what you were supposed to do? Think about the choices you make, the conversations you have, the friends you keep, the goals you set, the dreams you chase. Our story this morning started in the tombs with the madman of Gadara. I've heard graveyards referred to as the richest places on earth. There are unwritten books, songs that were never composed, lives that were never lived, stories that were never told. You are gifted differently than I am. You can't do what I do, and I can't do what you're called to do. There are people who need to hear your story because your story is different from my story, and our stories are different from the story of the madman of Gadara. But this one thing we do know is that the enemy will be overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So in closing, I want to pray for us today. Lord, I thank you that you pursue us every day of our lives. I love that you never give up on us and that when we look, you're in the details. I'm thankful that you are for us more than we can even imagine. I'm honored and overwhelmed that you are the author and finisher of our faith. And a relationship with you writes a story that heals, strengthens, and empowers us to respond to you in even greater faith. Lord, I pray for more of your glory in the days ahead. We ask all of this in your holy and precious name. Amen.